Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Well, we're recording this at the end of July 2021, and like many companies across the globe, we've been in lockdown, we've been out of lockdown, back in and out, and now it seems that there is actually light at the end of the tunnel and people are starting to return back to the workplace. And I must admit, the people that I've spoken to are going back with some apprehension and a little bit nervous about going back into the workplace. But obviously, as the vaccination programs are rolled out across the globe, hopefully it will be a safe place for everybody to be able to return to work. But the question still remains about remote working. So I think what's happened over the last year or so is that it's proven that it can be really effective. It can be a great way for people to have a pretty good work-life balance, being able to work remotely from home. And also there's an option now for going back into the workplace. But we recorded a podcast last year to talk about remote working, as it was very new and quite scary at the time, over a year ago. But what we didn't really touch on was about security when working from home. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Steve Mason, who's a senior information security consultant at Blackmores. And we're just going to have a chat about the general security risks about working remotely. Because COVID or no COVID, it looks like this blended approach to working remotely is here to stay. So this is when businesses are taking this seriously and actually creating processes, being more aware really of what the security risks are and implementing controls to mitigate that risk across their business. So welcome back, Steve.
Hi Mel, good to be here.
Great, thanks very much for joining us again. So now, Steve, you've been really busy carrying out information security audits, implementing 27001 whilst we've been in lockdown. Could you just share with us, from your point of view, how that experience has been?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a strange experience, really. When normally you're on site with a client, you can see lots of things, you can hear lots of things, and you often pick up some security issues just by being there. So we've had to take on a different approach, and ask more searching questions, let's say, of clients to find out what they're doing. And certainly when it comes to security of working from home, it's always a good idea to understand what the client has done in terms of a risk assessment around working from home. Because whether we like it or not, working from home is here to stay. I think the flexible working has proven to be a godsend to many people. And now that employees have tasted the freedom of that work-life balance, they're not going to so easily let it go. But that doesn't need to be a negative thing. That could be quite a positive thing for organisations. But by making it positive, we've got to think about the security.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think certainly last year, when employees were told to work from home, some had devices and some didn't. Some just had to use their own devices. And it was literally, all hands on deck to try and keep businesses going, to try and keep business as usual, even though it was far from usual. And so what kind of situation do you think businesses are in now when it comes to devices and security around devices?
I think most companies have probably got all their own equipment in use, certainly out in the home environment, the home office. But certainly back in those early days, you might have had a situation where an employee was being asked to go and work from home and, by the way, just use your own equipment. Now, there are a number of issues around that sort of thing, because you need to make sure that the employee's got the equipment set up in a way that you would like it to prevent any risks creeping in. So that means considering a bring your own device process or policy. Now, we often think about bring your own device as about bringing your own device into the office, but it can be a situation of bring your own device to your home office. So things that should be considered there, and one of the biggest things is making sure that your antivirus is compatible with what you've got and, the company. if your antivirus isn't up to date and that sort of thing, it could be you're introducing viruses. Also, make sure that if people are working from home, they do work via a secure VPN. That's most important. At least with a secure VPN, you've got some two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication going on to allow them access.
So, a quick question on that then, Steve. How would an employee know if they've got a secure VPN? And in terms of antivirus, is it down to the employer to ensure that all of the devices are checked to ensure that they do have that antivirus software installed or downloaded? Could you just share with me a bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the secure VPN, how would you know you've got that? Well, it would be simply through making sure it's a VPN that has a good password, or preferably two-factor or multi-factor authentication. Lots of people use an app called Authenticate, so that you would go onto your system, you type your password in, then it would ask for a code which would come through your mobile phone. You type that code in, and that would then grant you access through your VPN. If it's just simply logging on to a system and putting a password in, that may not be as secure as you want it to be.
So would it be a good idea for organisations to put this into some type of policy, and then also to audit it periodically to verify that that is actually working in practice?
Yes, I've actually seen a number of clients now starting to put together a working from home policy, which would bring this sort of thing into place. And that working from home policy would point both the employee and the employer in a direction to consider good security practices. You mentioned antivirus. Is it important for the company to keep that up to date? I don't think the company can keep that up to date, especially if it's the employee's own equipment. But if the employee is doing something on behalf of the company, then the company does have a right to ask for the best antivirus to be put in place, because you're doing work for them. So it might be guidance that's needed, to say to the person, well, these are typically the good antivirus things to use, and direct the employee to use those ones.
Okay, great. And would you include within that policy other types of devices like a printer or a mobile phone or USB devices, things like that? Because I know in many households where you've got a number of people within the household working from home, you might all be sharing the same printer.
Oh, very much so, yes. Yes, I would include those, although what I have actually noticed is that printing has disappeared. People working from home are just not printing anything. I was even speaking to a client this morning who said, no, we have no printers at home, everything's done electronically. And that's quite a refreshing move. I think what we have witnessed is that the use of technology, the way we use it, has moved on probably 15, 20 years in just a matter of 18 months. And the way people sort of approach technology, because we've all been on that very, very steep learning curve. And I think the paper-free office that we all sort of thought would never come is actually here now.
Yeah, and which is fantastic for the environment, isn't it? We have many clients that have implemented environmental policies and systems.
Yes, yeah.
And this is a great way forward for them. But I think what you were just saying about, moving forward by 15 years or so, that was reflected in the news last night when they announced that the top 5 big tech companies, their profit margins are just exponential. For a 3-month period, it's across all 5. We're talking, Microsoft, Amazon. Their profits were huge over that period of time. So yeah, I think, people are using tech in a different way, using it more, and yeah, adapting as we've all had to.
Exactly, yes, yeah.
So in terms of the software as well that businesses might use, how do you kind of keep tabs on that when people are working remotely?
Well, normally when you log in via your VPN, then that means you're onto the company's system. So the company can still monitor your software and make sure that things are up to date if you're using the company's software and if you're using a company's device. But if you're not using a company's device and you're using your own device, then you as an employee have a responsibility to make sure that all the patches are up to date. Now, most patches will occur when you log off at night and you see that screen come up saying waiting to update, and you think, oh, glad I turned it off now, not first thing in the morning, because it normally keeps you going for about an hour or so. But yeah, it's just making sure things are turned off so the updates can occur. If you keep doing that, then you're basically going to be okay. There is a thing in most laptops where you could turn them on to be auto updates, and that's the important thing. And if you don't know how to do that, then talk to your IT department. There's going to be somebody in the IT department who's going to be able to talk you through that.
And have you found with remote working that there have been issues with backing up information from devices, because people might be using their own devices that may not necessarily be connected to the server, then it's backed up and so it's safe and secure?
Oh, very much so, yeah. That's going to have to be a situation where, again, guidance is given. And that might be a case of putting an extra bit of information into your backup policy, which says that you need to back up onto a hard drive, and that hard drive must be encrypted, and that must be stored away safely. So, but even if you are working on your own device, and if you go through the VPN, you should have access to all the shared areas like OneDrive or SharePoint and all those sorts of things. So you shouldn't really have to back up anything on your own device or from your own device. But if you do, make sure it's done securely and make sure it's encrypted and protected. One thing I would recommend not to do is to use any sort of form of USB stick as a backup. It's what we call volatile memory, that it could be working the minute you back it up, but the next time you plug it in, it might not work and you'll never be able to recover the data that's on there.
So that hard drive that you back data up onto, again, that needs to be protected as well, doesn't it? I mean, have you found that some companies are making investments so that employees do have secure places to lock devices away in? And how do you think this might affect insurance as well for people working from home?
That's a good thing, yes, because you've got to think about that. If you've suddenly created a home office, you've got to make sure that your home insurance has catered for that. You know, because if you lost the information within your home office, will your insurance protect you on that? The equipment and everything like that. So, and that's something that even companies need to think about. You know, how are they going to recompense employees that have to add more money to the insurance? You know, so if you've got a hard drive, then hopefully you've got a set of drawers also where you work, and you can just sort of lock them away. But not everybody's that lucky. You know, some people working on kitchen tables, some people working on the dining room table. You've got to do what's best. And I think at the end of the day, it's always passing the risk back to the company and saying, look, this is the risk I face. And it's for the company then to resolve that risk with you and give you the advice. Because at the end of the day, the company's got to take the risk. The management have got to take the risk, not the employee. They shouldn't be stressed out by any of this.
And do you think many employers actually know what risks they're exposed to because of, you know, the situation with their employees? Because obviously there's a lot of trust here, isn't there, Steve? With people actually, you know, putting their PCs away, or, you know, not letting children, you know, play on it in the evening or something with computer games, when actually it's company property, you know, and same with mobile phones as well. I mean, you could say, well, they were all risks prior to COVID, but I'm sure that must be a greater risk because we've got so many more people working remotely now. I mean, do you think employers are aware of these risks if they're not doing any risk assessments?
If they're not doing any risk assessments, I don't think they are aware. The companies I tend to work with are aware, because if they haven't done a full-blown risk assessment, at least they've done a SWOT and PESTLE. So they've understood the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities and threats that employees face by working at home. And that's important. Get that feedback as much as you can. What are employees facing? One of the early things that came up was, of course, that people would be logging on via their own routers. I have had people turn around to me and say, oh, it doesn't matter if their router's not secure, we've got a secure VPN. I'm never too happy about that sort of approach to security, because if you know there's a weakness, put that weakness right. Don't say, oh, don't worry about it, we've got other ways of protecting it. Because why would you do that? It's a bit like sort of locking your front door and leaving the key in it. Saying, well, I'm not too worried if they get in because we've got a burglar alarm inside. So that'll scare them off. No, if you know you've got a weakness, put that weakness right. And then you've got no chance of somebody creeping in the back door and perhaps spending all their time hacking into your VPN. You may think the VPN's secure, but if somebody's got time to do it, there are people out there just spending all their time learning how to hack into things. So one of the early things was to get employees to check their routers at home and make sure that the password on the router was a strong password. Because I bet your bottom dollar that there's many people out there now listening to this that haven't ever changed the password on their router at home. And it's still probably something like password 1234. Which simply means that anybody out there in the wide world can hack into their systems at their own leisure. So always be careful about that, But I think you're right. It's a level of trust working from home. I've not come across any employees that have really abused that trust. In fact, what I come across are employees that are far more diligent in making sure security works. If you give them the tools, if you give them the guidance, the policy, the training, everything like that, they work harder at that security than perhaps they might have done in the office.
Yeah, you mentioned training there, Steve. It's all well and good having policies and procedures, but unless there is awareness about what the potential risks are and how the company is looking at controlling them and the guidance and support that they can give to employees, it can be difficult, I guess, without that training. So would you recommend having some type of online training course that companies can use, not just right now, but also in the future?
Yeah, if not an online training course, certainly some very simple, short presentations that somebody can read through. Something that's not much more than 3 or 4 slides that you can say, right, there are a couple of presentations you need to read through just to remind yourself of what you're doing. Things like clear desk, clear screen, security within the home. Because if people are working at home and they've got partners or other members of the family working with them, how are they ensuring that they're not compromising any sort of security? You mentioned earlier about children getting on the laptop and things like that, computers and phones. In my case, it's cats. I find if I leave my office door open whilst I'm working, I can guarantee one of my cats is going to come in and sleep on my laptop. And that can end up with losing data. So so you need to think about what's happening in your home environment. And if you're having a conversation, I have had conversations with clients where I've said, I can actually hear somebody else on the phone somewhere. And they might say, oh yeah, that's my husband, he's working on another call. And I've then had to just gently remind them, well, I can hear what he's saying. He possibly can hear what you're saying. So, and then they sort of close doors.
Yeah, that has creeped up, hasn't it? So that's kind of, security in those kind of virtual meeting rooms that you join, but then you could also be involved in some other meetings as well within the household that you don't want to be part of.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a good point, is security within virtual meeting rooms. It's a policy that we've actually come up with in Blackmores. Both myself and Rachel in Blackmores put our heads together and came up with a virtual meeting room policy. And I actually had one of the certification bodies, ISAQA, turn around the other week and say it was a very good policy. They asked why we'd written it, because it wasn't a requirement of 27,000. I said, well, we wrote it because it was an output of a risk assessment. And so that's really where we're getting to, is that companies should do those risk assessments and react to the outputs. Don't worry about what's said in the standard, whether it tells you you've got to have this or that or the other. React to your risk assessment. And that virtual meeting room policy was a reaction to that. And in that policy, we cover what to do to prepare the security of a meeting and what to do to ensure the security of a meeting whilst it's taking place.
I'll tell you what we'll do, Steve. We'll actually include that document for free for our ISO show listeners. So if anybody would like to get access to that document that Steve's just mentioned, then just drop us a line. So obviously You can leave comments when you finish listening to this podcast, when it's safe for you to do so. We always welcome any comments and any suggestions for the ISO show. But if you'd like access to that, just drop us a line on the link to the show notes, and that's located at our website, www.blackmoresuk.com. We'll also be including that in the ISology Hub as well. So that's our online membership portal where you can get access to all sorts of different training courses, coffee break training that Steve's produced, like the Clear Desk, Clear Screen. They're all in there as well. So if you're looking for some training resources, tools and techniques, then they're in the ISology Hub too. So just getting back to the virtual meeting rooms, then some people are a bit fed up with working, within their own four walls, and they decide to kind of scoot off to a coffee shop, whether it be Starbucks or whatever, just to get away from, the dog, the cat, the wife, the husband, the kids or whatever, just to get out, which obviously is fine. Obviously you can work from anywhere, providing you've got Wi-Fi access and you've got your laptop. But what are the risks there, Steve?
Well, the first risk is what you just said there, Wi-Fi access. If you go and work at a coffee shop, there's a number of things to bear in mind. You're in a public place, first of all. Telephone calls would be a no-no, because you'll be talking to other people around you can hear what's going on. And also it can be quite annoying for other people in the coffee shop to hear you doing business. Also think about where you sit in the coffee shop. I read lots of spy novels, and normally in spy novels you find the spy goes and sits with his back to the wall, looking out on the place so he can see what's going on surreptitiously. And that's often a good place to sit when you're doing any work. Don't sit with your back to the windows where every passerby can read what's on your laptop. Don't sit in the middle of the coffee shop where people on the next table can read what you're doing. Go and sit by the wall so that you can control what's going on. And if somebody approaches you, you've then got to use the Window D or Windows L just to minimize your desktop or lock your desktop. Very, very simple bit of control there. Whatever you do, never ever log on to a coffee shop Wi-Fi system to do your work. There have been situations where some fraudsters have put in false Wi-Fi hubs, and people have logged onto those and they've just stolen the details. So you have to be very, very careful. If you need to get any sort of access to Wi-Fi, do it through your mobile phone, a trusted source, a hotspot, because that is a way to ensure that it's not going to get hacked into. So never trust what's in the coffee shop. As I say, just make sure you know where you're sitting. Just be vigilant of what's around you. I don't think there's anything wrong with working in a coffee shop. Just be sensible about it, to be quite honest.
Yes, yeah, because everybody's got a mobile phone on them. They could quite easily just take a quick snapshot if they see something interesting on your screen that could be of interest to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, yeah. And I've actually got a camera now that I can photograph something very clearly, even if it's half a mile away. And I think we need to be aware. I'm not saying that everybody's going to be spying on you, but the technology's out there, and the technology on mobile phones, cameras, is getting better. So if somebody sees something interesting, they can snap it if they want to, so...
I didn't realise you were into these spy novels, Steve. That might be why you're such an awesome information security consultant, that you do your homework every night. Extracurricular activity there going on. Cool. Well, is there anything else at all? Obviously, I've asked lots of questions, but is there any kind of hints or tips that you'd like to leave our ISO show listeners with today?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest tip is, just be aware of the changes that have gone on, aware of the risks that are being introduced through this new way of working. Don't be afraid of those risks, but be sensible about how you fix them. And if you're working from home, just be a little bit more vigilant about what's around you and who's around you. And also think about visitors coming into your house and all that sort of thing. Good practice, I think, is that when you come to the end of your working day, just lock everything away, put it into a bag, and perhaps put it into a safe location in the house. Never ever store it near the front door or anything like that, because that's where it can easily be picked up by any bogus callers or anything like that. But just lock it away safely. Also, it then stops any curious members of the family sort of going onto your laptop and that sort of thing. And often going onto a laptop, perhaps from members of the family, is not necessarily about them seeing your data, but about them going to perhaps a website that might introduce a virus into your computer. You know, and I'm not talking about nefarious websites. I'm talking about perhaps some of the auction websites that you might come across, where perhaps there's less care taken over the protection against viruses. So it's not always about them seeing your data, it's about what they can introduce to your systems, and you don't really want them to do that.
Okay, there's some great tips there, Steve, as usual, so thank you so much for that. I think that's been a really good refresher for everybody as well, because obviously we've been working from home for a while now, and there might have been an initial blitz on security controls with some organisations, but it's good to look at this kind of more from a longer term perspective, and how businesses can, if they weren't prepared last year, they can certainly establish the policies, procedures, training, controls now as we move into this kind of flexible working environment. So I'd just like to say thanks very much for joining me today, Steve.
That's a pleasure.
Great. Well, thanks very much for listening to the ISO show. As I mentioned earlier on, if you'd like to get access to that virtual meeting room policy that Steve mentioned, I think I've got that right, Steve, is it?
Yes, we call it virtual meeting room policy, and it is a framework that people can then adapt to their needs.
Yeah, so we'll include reference to that in the show notes, and just drop us a line if you'd like to get a copy of that. Again, that's also going to be saved over in the ISology Hub, and that's also where we've got all sorts of different training and resources in there regarding security. Thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.